So now we're looking at the code that makes up the CRUD application. This is the application code that makes the CRUD application work. The reason we're doing this is I want to demonstrate how SQL is used within the context of an application programming language. SQL is a language that is specific for interacting with a database, and it's not really an application programming language. You couldn't write an entire application just in SQL. So the purpose of these lessons is to show how the SQL is used within the context of an application programming language. In this case, the application is written in PHP, which is a common language for use on the web. You'll probably see a lot of it if you look at these sorts of things. And here you see a function called getAlbumsSQL. And inside this function, you'll see here is some SQL. The rest of this around here is all PHP. And here's some SQL, which is actually being used in a PHP variable. And you see it's got these single quotes, much like you would do in SQL. And the SQL is inside those quotes. And what this does is it assigns this SQL statement to a variable so that it can then be used in the interface into the database. So this line here passes the query into the database, and this line here executes the query. So this query is a very simple one. Select star from album, order by title. And what that does is it selects all of the data associated with the album table, and it returns it in order by title. And that allows this screen to happen. Here we have the front page of the application. When you start up the application, this is what you get, and it lists all the albums in the table. And in this case, here they are. They're in title order, and they're displayed in this format with these little buttons next to them. And so the code that does that takes the data once it's been returned from the query, that's the PHP code. But the query itself is a very simple query, nothing magical about it, just like we've been learning in the rest of the course. Here's a more complicated query. This is the query that gets the track data. Let's go take a look at that in the application. Here we have the edit album page, and it's this album here, Hendrix in the West. And the tracks are listed here. They're in little edit boxes, so you can edit them if you want to. But these come from that query. It's a straightforward select query. The only thing special about it is it has this code for the duration, because as we remember, the duration is kept in the database in seconds, and we want to display it in minutes and seconds with the colon in the way that we would expect time to be displayed. So if we look at the code, here's the query. There's select, ID, album, title, track number. And this is a MySQL function called concat with separator. So the first argument is a separator, that's the colon. And then after that, we have the strings that are to be concatenated. And when they're concatenated, the separator is put between them. Very convenient and very specific to MySQL. I've not seen this function or anything like it in any other database. But it's a good idea to use the features of the database that you're using if you can. And if you know that your application is always going to be run with this particular database engine, go ahead and use these features. They're usually efficient, they're optimized, and they make the rest of the code easier to do. This way I don't have to do all of this in PHP. I can just do it right here. It happens quickly within the database engine. It's actually faster than if I were to run it in an interpreted language like PHP. So here we have the two arguments, our duration div60. So the div operator, you'll remember, does an integer division, leaving a remainder. And then we use duration mod 60 with the mod operator that gets the remainder of the division. And this is what gives us the minutes and the seconds. The lpad function, we covered this before. It pads the left side of a string with zeros. So here it's looking for a length of 2. And so if there's less than 2 characters, it will use zeros to fill it up to 2 characters. All of that gets concatenated with the colon in between, and we have what we saw over here, minutes and seconds. And here you see one that's padded a 0, 13 minutes and 6 seconds. So select all of that stuff from track where album ID equals question mark. What the question mark does is it's a placeholder, and this is very common in the interface between a application programming language and SQL. You'll use a placeholder in your select or in your query or in your SQL, and that placeholder will get replaced with data from the application programming language. So in this case, we're looking for album ID. We can use this same select statement for all of our queries, no matter what album it is that we're querying, and that album ID gets filled in later when the statement is executed. So here we have the code prepare. That's typically how the SQL is sent to the database engine. And then execute is a separate step. And at the execute time, the data that replaces the placeholders is actually entered. So in this case, we have the album ID variable in the database interface that is replaced in here to create the SQL that'll actually be presented to the database engine to execute. So that's how a query works within the context of an application programming language like PHP.